Marcus Cole had not fired a rifle in 7 years, and he intended to keep it that way for the rest of his life. The man who had once been called the Angel of Death by his enemies and Ghost by his allies now spent his mornings making pancakes shaped like dinosaurs and his evenings reading bedtime stories about friendly dragons and brave knights. His hands that had once ended lives from distances that seemed impossible now pushed his son on the backyard swing and tied shoelaces and wiped away tears when Ethan scraped his knee. 7 years ago, Marcus had walked away from everything, and he had never looked back. The farmhouse in rural Montana sat on 40 acres of land surrounded by mountains and silence and peace, and that was exactly what Marcus wanted for his son. Ethan was 8 years old with his mother's bright green eyes and his father's stubborn jaw, and he had no idea what his father used to be. To Ethan, his dad was just Dad, who made the best grilled cheese sandwiches, and who could fix anything, and who always had time to play catch even when he was tired from working on the farm. Marcus wanted to keep it that way forever. The night everything changed started like any other night. Marcus had tucked Ethan into bed and read him a chapter from his favorite book about space explorers and distant planets, and Ethan had fallen asleep with a smile on his face. Dreaming of stars, Marcus went to his own room and lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the silence of the Montana night. He fell asleep around 11, and that was the last peaceful sleep he would have for a very long time. At exactly 3:47 in the morning, Marcus woke up. He did not know what had woken him because the house was silent and the night was still, but something was wrong, and his body knew it even before his mind caught up. There was a hum in the air like electricity, but different, and Marcus felt the hair on his arm stand up, and he was already moving. Before he understood why, he rolled out of bed and grabbed the Glock from his nightstand in one smooth motion that his body remembered even after 7 years. Then his bedroom wall exploded. Not exploded exactly, but dissolved into nothing as a beam of blue light cut through it like it was made of paper, and Marcus saw something step through the hole that should not exist. It was tall and gray and thin, with huge black eyes and 4 arms, and it moved with a strange jerking motion like a puppet. With tangled strings behind it came 2 more, and they were carrying weapons that glowed with the same blue light. Marcus did not hesitate, and he did not think, and he did not feel anything except a cold calm that had kept him alive through 3 wars. He raised the Glock and fired twice, and both rounds hit the first creature in the center of its chest. Purple blood sprayed across the floor, and the creature fell, and the other 2 froze for just a moment, as if they could not understand what had just happened. That moment was almost enough. Marcus fired again and again, but the second creature raised some kind of shield, and the bullets sparked and vanished, and then a pulse of energy hit Marcus in the chest. The world went white and then black, and Marcus fell. When he woke up, his house was destroyed, and his son was gone. Marcus lay in the wreckage for a long moment, and he felt something inside him that he had buried 7 years ago beginning to wake up. It was cold, and it was patient, and it was absolutely merciless. He stood up slowly and looked around at what remained of his home, and he saw the body of the creature he had killed still lying in the purple puddle of its own blood. Marcus walked over to it and knelt down and studied it with eyes that saw everything and forgot nothing. It was wearing some kind of uniform with symbols he did not recognize, and it had a device strapped to its wrist that was still blinking with strange lights. Marcus removed the device carefully and examined it, and even though he did not understand the symbols, he understood machines, and this was clearly some kind of communication or navigation tool. They had taken his son, but they had left him a trail. Marcus stood up and walked through the ruins of his home to what had been Ethan's room. The walls were gone, and the roof was gone, but Ethan's bed was still there with his favorite blanket and his stuffed bear that he called Captain Fuzzy. Marcus picked up the bear and held it for a moment, and something in his eyes changed. The father who made dinosaur pancakes and read Bedtime Stories was still there, but something else was waking up behind those gray eyes. Something that had killed more men than he could count from. Distances that made other snipers shake their heads in disbelief. Something that had once crawled through mud and snow and sand for days without food or water, just to take a single shot. Something that did not know how to quit and did not know how to fail and did not know the meaning of impossible. Marcus put the bear in his pocket and walked out of the ruined house and looked up at the sky full of stars. His son was up there somewhere. The creatures who had taken him thought they were safe because they were far away, and because Earth was primitive, and because humans were just animals to be captured and sold. They did not know what they had done. They did not know that they had taken the child of a man who had once been the most dangerous sniper in the world. They did not know that Marcus Cole had a rule that he had lived by his entire career, and that rule was very simple. Take the shot, never miss, and never ever stop hunting until the target is down. Marcus looked at the alien device on his wrist, and he began to understand how it worked, because he was always good with machines, and because his mind was sharp and cold and focused. He would learn how to use this technology, and he would find out where they had taken his son, and he would follow them across the entire universe if he had to. And when he found them, he would teach them something that no species in the galaxy had ever learned. He would teach them what it meant to be hunted by a human. He would teach them why his people had once been the most successful predators on their planet. He would teach them about patience and endurance and precision and the cold, terrible will that could wait for days and weeks and months for the perfect moment. And then he would take his son back and he would burn everything they had built to the ground. Marcus walked to his truck, which was somehow still intact, and he got inside and started driving toward the nearest city. He had a lot to learn and not much time to learn it, but he had something more important than time. He had purpose. And purpose, in the hands of a man like Marcus Cole, was more dangerous than any weapon in the galaxy. The hunt had begun. 3 weeks after the night that destroyed his world, Marcus Cole walked into a bar on a space station at the edge of known space. He had learned many things in those 3 weeks. He had learned that the device on his wrist was a navigation computer and communication tool combined into one. And he had learned how to read the alien symbols, and he had learned how to make it show him maps of the galaxy. He had learned that Earth was what the galaxy called an uncontacted world, which meant it had no protection and no representation and no rights under galactic law. He had learned that there were species who made their living by capturing people from uncontacted worlds and selling them as slaves and pets and curiosities to wealthy buyers. Across the stars, he had learned that the creatures who took his son were called the Victari, and they were one of the most successful slaver species in the galaxy. And he had learned how to steal a Victari ship from a remote outpost and how to fly it, and how to reach a place called Nexus Station, where information could be bought and sold. The bar was called The Void, and it was full of creatures that Marcus had never imagined in his worst nightmares. There were tall ones and short ones, and ones covered in scales, and ones covered in fur, and ones that seemed to be made of nothing but tentacles and eyes. They all turned to look at him when he walked in, and he felt their eyes evaluating him and dismissing him as nothing important. He was just a human after all. Just a soft pink creature with no claws and no armor and no visible weapons. Just prey that had somehow wandered into a den of predators. Marcus ignored all of them and walked to the bar and sat down next to a Victari, who was drinking something that looked like liquid metal. The Victari was larger than the ones who had attacked his home, and it wore expensive clothes and jewelry made of strange glowing stones. Marcus had done his research, and he knew this creature was an information broker named Sylvax, who had connections to the slaver networks throughout the galaxy. Marcus sat in silence for a long moment, and then he spoke in the Victari language, which he had spent every waking hour of the last 3 weeks learning. "I am looking for a human child," he said, and his voice was calm and quiet and completely without Emotion. The child was taken from Earth 3 weeks ago and sold to the Kethra. Dominion and I want to know where he is. Sylvex turned to look at Marcus, and its huge black eyes blinked slowly, and then it laughed. The laugh was wet and gurgling and deeply unpleasant, and it made Marcus think of drowning human, it said, and its voice dripped with contempt. Do you have any idea how many slaves pass through Kethra space every cycle? Your offspring is probably already working in a mine or serving at a feast, or perhaps it has been dissected for study. Sylvex laughed again, and several other creatures at nearby tables laughed with it. The primitives are so amusing, one of them said, and others nodded their agreement. Marcus did not react to the laughter, and he did not react to the insults, and he did not react to the horrible suggestions about what might have happened to his son. He simply waited until the laughter died down, and then he moved. No one in the bar saw exactly what happened, because Marcus moved faster than their eyes could follow. One moment he was sitting still on his stool, and the next moment, Sylvex was pinned against the wall with a metal spike through its secondary hand, and Marcus was holding a small black device against the soft flesh of its throat. The bar went completely silent. That is a neural disruptor, someone whispered with disbelief in their voice. And where did he get a neural disruptor? I took it from the last person who did not answer my questions, Marcus said, and his voice was still calm and quiet and completely without emotion. I am going to ask you one more time, and you are going to answer me, and if you do not answer me, I'm going to activate this device, and your brain is going to melt inside your skull. He paused for just a moment, and his gray eyes were cold and empty and terrifying. My son, he said. And where is he? Sylvex was trembling now, and purple blood was dripping from its pinned hand, and its huge black eyes were wide with something that might have been fear. I do not know where your son is, Sylvex said quickly, but I know who bought him, and I know where that buyer lives. Marcus waited, and Sylvex kept talking. The child was purchased by High Lord Kethrol himself, and the High Lord is the ruler of the entire Kethra Dominion, and he collects exotic specimens from across the galaxy. Your son was taken to the throne world, and he is kept in the fortress of the High Lord as a curiosity and a pet. Sylvex paused, and something like cruel satisfaction flickered in its eyes despite its fear. The throne world is surrounded by the largest military fleet in this sector of the galaxy, and the fortress has never been breached in 10,000 years. Your son might as well be on the other side of the universe, human, and there is nothing you can do to reach him. Marcus was silent for a long moment, and then he released Sylvex and stepped back, and the information broker slumped against the wall, clutching its injured hand. Thank you for the information, Marcus said, and he placed a small chip on the bar, and that is payment for your trouble. Then he turned and walked out of the bar without looking back. Behind him, the creatures of the void watched him go, and they exchanged uneasy glances with each other. What just happened? One of them asked, and no one had an answer, but they all felt something in the air that had not been there before, and it took them a long time to recognize what it was. It was fear. Not fear of Marcus Cole, because he was just one human, and what could one human do against the might of the Kethra Dominion? No, it was a different kind of fear. It was the fear of uncertainty. It was the fear of something new and unknown entering the galaxy. It was the fear of a predator that none of them recognized. Outside the bar, Marcus walked through the crowded corridors of Nexus Station, and his mind was already working on the problem. The throne world was 1,200 light years away, and the fortress was supposed to be impossible to breach, and the High Lord was protected by 10,000 elite guards. Any reasonable person would give up and accept that the situation was hopeless. But Marcus Cole had never been reasonable, and he had never given up on anything in his entire life. He had once crawled through enemy territory for 11 days to take a single shot, and he had succeeded when everyone said it was impossible. He had once waited in a frozen hole in the ground for 72 hours without moving to eliminate a target that no one else could reach. He had once made a kill from a distance, so far that his own commanders refused to believe it until they saw the evidence with their own eyes. The galaxy did not know what humans were capable of. The galaxy had never met a creature that could wait and watch and plan for weeks and months and years for the perfect moment. The galaxy had never met a sniper, but they were about to learn. Marcus found his stolen ship and began plotting a course for Kethra space. He had 1,200 light years to travel, and a fortress to breach, and a son to save. He was going to need a plan, and he was going to need a rifle. The journey to Kethra space took Marcus 3 weeks, and he spent every moment of it learning and planning and preparing. He learned that the Kethra were reptilian species with scaled skin and sharp teeth and eyes that could see heat better than light, and they had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years through brutality and fear. He learned that their throne world was called Kethra Prime, and it orbited a dim red sun, and the entire planet was covered in black glass. Mountains and dark fortresses, and the capital city was built around the massive fortress of the High Lord. He learned that the fortress had energy, shields and automated weapons, and 10,000 of the most elite warriors in the Dominion guarding every entrance and every corridor and every room. He learned that no one had ever successfully attacked the fortress, and that those who tried were captured and tortured and displayed as warnings to anyone else who might think of challenging the might of the Kethra. He learned all of this, and none of it changed his mind, because he also learned something else. He learned that the galaxy had no concept of what he was about to do. In galactic warfare, battles were fought with energy weapons, at close range or with massive ships firing at each other across the void of space. The idea of a single organic being killing a target from kilometers away with a chemical weapon that threw a small piece of metal was considered absurd and primitive, and completely impossible. They had never seen a sniper. They had never met a species that had evolved the patience and the precision and the ruthless efficiency of a human hunter. They did not know that humans had been killing each other from impossible distances for hundreds of years, and that they had gotten very, very good at it. Marcus arrived in Kethra space, and he did not try to sneak past the military fleet. And he did not try to fight his way through the defenses. Instead, he landed at a civilian spaceport, and he walked off his ship, and he got a job. He became a maintenance worker on a cargo ship that made regular deliveries to the throne world, and he spent 2 months learning everything he could about the planet and the fortress and the routines of the High Lord. He learned the patrol patterns of the guards and the timing of the shield rotations and the layout of every building within 3 kilometers of the fortress. He found the perfect position on a mountain peak that overlooked the fortress from a distance of 3,412 meters, and he spent days studying the wind patterns and the atmospheric conditions and the gravitational effects of the planet. And he watched his sun through a telescopic lens that he had built from stolen parts and modified technology. Marcus could see into the throne room of the High Lord, and there in a gilded cage near the throne was Ethan. His son was thin and pale and frightened, but he was alive. And he was unbroken, and Marcus felt something burn in his chest every time he saw him. Ethan would sometimes look up at the sky, as if he was searching for something, and Marcus knew that his son was waiting for him. "Hold on," Marcus whispered across the impossible distance, "and I am coming." While Marcus prepared for his mission, he also prepared his weapon. He found a weapons dealer on the throne world who specialized in exotic and primitive weapons from across the galaxy, and he commissioned a rifle. The dealer was a small furry creature with too many eyes, and it looked at Marcus with confusion and contempt when he explained what he wanted. "You want a weapon that throws a small piece of metal using a chemical explosion," the dealer said. And its voice was high and squeaky and disbelieving. Why would anyone want such a primitive thing when you could have a plasma rifle or a disruptor beam or a neural scrambler? Marcus did not explain because the dealer would not understand. He simply paid a large amount of money and waited while the dealer built the weapon to his specifications. When it was finished, the rifle was beautiful and terrible and perfect. It was based on the designs that Marcus remembered from his old life, but it was built with materials that did not exist on Earth, and it was more accurate and more powerful than anything he had ever held before. He spent weeks calibrating it and testing it, and learning exactly how it would perform in the thin atmosphere and low gravity of Kethra Prime. He calculated trajectories and wind drift and bullet drop, and he ran the numbers 1,000 times until he knew them in his sleep. The shot would be difficult, but not impossible. He had made harder shots before. The Feast of Ascension was the holiest day in the Kethra calendar, and Marcus learned that on this day, the High Lord would appear on the balcony of his fortress to address his people. For one brief moment, the most protected being in the Dominion would stand in the open air with nothing but his guards around him. That was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. He infiltrated the fortress 3 days before the feast using his maintenance worker credentials, and he planted small devices throughout the building that would disrupt communications and unlock doors at precisely the right moment. He mapped escape routes and prepared emergency plans, and he made sure that everything was in place for what he was about to do. Then he climbed to his position on the mountain peak, and he settled into the rocks, and he waited. He had food and water for 3 days, but he would not need it, because he would not move, and he would not eat, and he would not sleep until the shot was done. This was what he was built for. This was what humans had evolved to do over millions of years of hunting and being hunted. Wait and watch and strike at the perfect moment. The sun moved across the sky, and the hours passed, and Marcus lay perfectly still with his eye pressed to the scope, and his finger resting lightly on the trigger. He thought about Ethan, and he thought about the life they would have when this was over, and he thought about pancakes shaped like dinosaurs and bedtime stories about friendly dragons, and he waited. The Kethra did not know what was coming. They did not know that death was watching them from a distance that their minds could not comprehend. They did not know that a primitive human with a primitive weapon was about to do something that no one in the galaxy had ever done before. They did not know that the impossible was about to become possible. Marcus lay in the rocks, and he breathed slowly and steadily, and he watched the fortress with eyes that saw everything and forgot nothing. The Feast of Ascension was tomorrow, and tomorrow everything would change. Marcus had been in position for 36 hours, and his body was cold and stiff and screaming for movement. But he did not move. He had not eaten, and he had not slept, and he had barely breathed, and his eyes had not left the scope for more than a few seconds at a time. This was the discipline that had made him legendary among his people, and this was the patience that no other species in the galaxy possessed. Humans were persistence hunters who had evolved to chase prey across vast distances until the prey collapsed from exhaustion, and this same patience lived in Marcus now as he lay among the black glass rocks and waited for his moment. The red sun of Kethra Prime moved slowly across the purple sky, and the hours crawled by, and Marcus watched the fortress with absolute focus. He saw the guards changing shifts, and he counted their numbers and tracked their movements, and he noted every tiny detail that might matter when the moment came. He saw the dignitaries arriving for the feast in their expensive ships and their fine clothes, and he watched them enter the fortress with their slaves and servants trailing behind them. He saw the preparations being made on the great balcony where the High Lord would address his people, and he watched the servants setting up the ceremonial platforms and the banners and the symbols of Kethra power, and through it all he kept one eye on the window of the throne room where his son sat in his gilded cage waiting for a rescue that must have seemed impossible. Hold on, Ethan, Marcus thought, and just a few more hours, and we are going home. The sun began to set, and the sky turned from purple to deep red, and the stars began to appear one by one, and Marcus felt his heartbeat slow, and his breathing deepen, and his mind become clear and focused like a laser beam. This was the moment. This was what he had been waiting for. This was the shot that would change the galaxy. The great doors of the balcony opened, and the guards marched out in perfect formation, and they spread across the platform and took their positions with their weapons ready and their eyes scanning the crowd. Below 10,000 Kethra nobles had gathered in the plaza to witness the Feast of Ascension, and their cheers rose up like thunder as the doors opened, and then High Lord Kethral emerged. He was massive, even for his species, with scales that gleamed like black metal and eyes that burned with cold intelligence, and he moved with the absolute confidence of a being who had never known fear in his entire life. He wore ceremonial armor covered in jewels and symbols of his power, and he carried a staff that crackled with energy, and he looked down at his people with contempt and satisfaction. Marcus watched through his scope, and his crosshairs settled on the High Lord's skull, just above the base of the neck where the reptilian brain connected to the spine. This was the kill shot, and Marcus had made this shot 1,000 times before, on 100 different battlefields against enemies who thought they were safe. The distance was 3,412 meters. The wind was blowing at 7 kilometers per hour from the east, and Marcus adjusted his aim to compensate. The atmosphere was thin, and the gravity was low, and the bullet would travel differently than it would on Earth. And Marcus had calculated these factors to the smallest decimal point. He breathed in slowly and held it, and his finger tightened on the trigger by a fraction of a millimeter. High Lord Kethral raised his arms to address his people, and the crowd fell silent, and his voice boomed across the plaza, amplified by technology that carried it to every corner of the city. "My people," he began, and Marcus squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against his shoulder, and the bullet left the barrel at 3 times the speed of sound, and it flew through the thin air of Kethra Prime like a messenger from another world. 4 seconds. The bullet traveled for 4 seconds across the impossible distance, and in those 4 seconds, Marcus did not move and did not breathe and did not blink. 4 seconds is a long time when you are waiting to find out if your son will be saved, or if you have failed and condemned him to a life of slavery and suffering. 4 seconds is an eternity, and then High Lord Kethral's had exploded. Purple blood sprayed across the ceremonial platform, and the High Lord's body crumpled to the ground, and for a moment there was absolute silence as 10,000 Kethra tried to understand what had just happened. Then the screaming began. The guards rushed to the body, but there was nothing they could do, because the High Lord was dead before he hit the ground, and his brain was scattered across the balcony in pieces. They looked around wildly, searching for an attacker, but there was no one there, and no enemy ship in the sky, and no weapon that could have done what they had just witnessed. They did not think to look at the distant mountain peak, because no weapon in the known galaxy could kill from that range, and no species would even think to try. Chaos erupted in the fortress as alarms blared and guards ran through the corridors, and the security systems went haywire from the devices that Marcus had planted days before. And in the throne room, a small maintenance shuttle lifted off from the landing pad, piloted by an automated program that Marcus had installed, and it flew through the chaos toward the gilded cage where Ethan was screaming and crying and not understanding what was happening. The shuttle's door opened, and a mechanical arm reached out and grabbed the cage and pulled it inside, and then the shuttle was flying up and up and up through the atmosphere and into space. Marcus was already moving down the mountain toward his hidden ship, and his body was screaming with pain from 36 hours of immobility, but he did not care. He reached his ship and launched into space, and he flew to the coordinates where the shuttle was waiting. And when he opened the airlock, his son was there. Ethan threw himself into his father's arms and sobbed and shook and clung to him like he would never let go. "Dad," Ethan cried, "and I knew you would come, and I told them you would come, and they laughed at me, but I knew." Marcus held his son, and he felt tears running down his face, and he did not try to stop them. "I will always come for you," Marcus said, "and always, and no matter how far and no matter how long, and I will always find you." They held each other for a long time in the cold darkness of space, while behind them the Kethra Dominion burned with confusion and rage and fear. And then Marcus set a course for home. And he took his son away from the nightmare and back toward the blue planet where they belonged. The shot had been impossible, but Marcus had taken it anyway. The rescue had been impossible, but Marcus had done it anyway, because that was what humans did. They did the impossible when they had no other choice. And the galaxy was about to learn that lesson in the most painful way imaginable. The death of High Lord Kethral sent shockwaves through the galaxy that would be felt for generations. At first, no one understood what had happened, and the theories were wild and impossible, and none of them came close to the truth. Some said it was a rival noble who had used some kind of new weapon that could not be detected, and the Kethra Dominion tore itself apart for weeks as nobles accused each other and fought bloody battles in the corridors of power. Some said it was an assassination by one of the other great powers of the galaxy who wanted to destabilize the Dominion, and the Kethra fleet mobilized for war against enemies who had no idea what they were being accused of. Some said it was the gods themselves who had struck down the High Lord for his arrogance, and this theory was popular among the religious sects who had always believed that the Kethra were being punished for their sins. But then the investigators found the bullet. It was lodged in the wall behind where the High Lord had been standing, and it was a small piece of metal that had been fired from a chemical weapon at incredible speed. And the investigators traced its trajectory back across the city. They followed the path of the bullet with mathematical precision, and they calculated angles and distances and wind patterns. And when they finished their calculations, they could not believe what they had found. The shot had come from a mountain peak 3,412 meters away. This was impossible. No weapon in the known galaxy could kill from that distance, and no species would even think to try, because it went against everything that galactic warfare had ever known. But the evidence was undeniable, and the investigators were forced to accept that someone had done what could not be done. Then they found the surveillance footage from the fortress, and they saw the maintenance shuttle that had escaped during the chaos, and they traced it back to a maintenance worker named Marcus Cole, who had arrived on the throne world 2 months earlier. They searched the databases and they found that Marcus Cole was human, and that humans came from an uncontacted world called Earth, and that Earth had been classified as a primitive planet with no significant technology or threat potential. They searched deeper and they found records of a Vectari slaving operation that had visited Earth, and they found that a human child had been captured and sold to the High Lord, and they found that the child's father had been present during the capture, and then they understood. A father had crossed the galaxy to save his son, and he had killed the most powerful being in the Dominion with a weapon so primitive that no one had thought to guard against it. The news spread across the galaxy like a wave of fire, and everywhere it went, it left fear and confusion in its wake. The Vectari immediately shut down all operations in the Sol system, and they erased Earth from their navigation charts, and they told their captains that the blue planet was forbidden territory. The other slaver species followed quickly because they had all heard the stories now, and they did not want to be the next to face the wrath of a human parent. The information brokers on Nexus Station talked of nothing else for months, and the story grew with each telling until Marcus Cole became a legend that parents told their children to frighten them into obedience. Cross a human, they would say, and they will follow you across the stars, and they will wait in the dark, and you will never see them coming. Meanwhile, Marcus and Ethan returned to Earth, and they landed in the mountains of Montana, and they walked through the ruins of their old home. The house was destroyed, but the land was still there, and the mountains were still there, and the silence and the peace were still there. We will rebuild, Marcus said, and we will start over and everything will be okay. Ethan nodded, but his eyes were haunted, and Marcus knew that the nightmares would come and that the healing would take a long time. But they were together and they were home, and that was all that mattered. Marcus burned the alien technology, and he destroyed the rifle, and he buried everything that connected him to what he had done, because he did not want that life anymore. But before he destroyed everything, he sent a message. He broadcast it on every frequency used by the slaver networks, and he transmitted it through every information broker in contested space, and he made sure that it reached every corner of the galaxy, where beings might think about hunting humans. The message was simple, and it was clear, and it was terrifying. My name is Marcus Cole, and I am human from the planet Earth. You took my son, and I took your High Lord. I crossed 1,200 light years, and I waited for months, and I killed him from a distance your minds cannot comprehend, with a weapon your technology cannot detect. Spread the word to anyone who would hunt my people. We are not prey. We do not forget. We do not forgive. And there is no distance far enough to keep you safe from us. Earth is closed. Permanently, the message was received, and the galaxy listened, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the great powers looked at the small blue planet at the edge of the spiral arm with something other than contempt. They looked at it with fear, because they had learned something terrible about humans, and they would never forget it. Humans were patient in ways that other species could not comprehend, and they could wait and watch and plan for years before striking. Humans were precise in ways that seemed impossible, and they could kill from distances that no other species had ever imagined. Humans were relentless in ways that defied reason, and they would cross the entire galaxy to protect the ones they loved. And humans did not give up. Ever on the farm in Montana, Marcus built a new house, and he planted a garden, and he taught his son how to fish in the mountain streams, and he tried to give Ethan the normal childhood that had been stolen from him. Some nights, Ethan would wake up screaming, and Marcus would hold him and tell him that he was safe and that nothing would ever hurt him again. Some nights, Marcus would sit on the porch and look up at the stars and think about what he had done and what it meant for his species and his planet. He had opened a door that could never be closed, and he had shown the galaxy what humans were capable of, and he knew that things would never be the same. But his son was safe, and his son was home, and that was worth any price. The years passed, and Ethan grew, and the nightmares faded, and the farm became a place of healing and peace. And somewhere out there among the stars, the creatures who had once thought themselves the apex predators of the galaxy looked at the darkness between the stars and wondered if something was watching them from a distance they could not imagine. They had learned a new emotion, and it would stay with them forever: fear of the primitives, fear of the soft pink creatures with no claws and no armor, fear of the death that came from nowhere and left nothing behind but a small piece of metal and a message that echoed across the void: fear of humanity. And that fear would keep Earth safe for a very long time.